When I read nonfiction. Nonfiction is the unfortunate harbor of a lot of lazy, ineffective, meandering prose, as well as posturing, which is manipulative and annoying. But every so often you encounter a book which combines a worthy subject, a compelling narrative, and sinuous prose. Good nonfiction is like exploration. You sail into uncharted waters and document everything you see. It has that pervasive quality of astonishment, along with a measure of detachment, so you don't get lost. I like the category itself, too, so modest, telling you what it isn't. Nonfiction, a humble claim, meaning that this is not going to be the truth, but at least you have my word that I'm not deliberately making things up. The latest book I read was by the author who wrote the book about Seabiscuit, which was a huge hit. I did not read that book, but I know it put up a small story to represent its time, an indicator which I believe is called synecdoche, a technical literary term where part stands for the whole, and, to finish the package with ribbons and bows, it was a highly emotional story of a struggle against long odds with victorious results. That's got bestseller written all over it. You publish it and get out of the way. The book I read was constructed in that exact framework. It was the story of a man who was a bombardier in World War II. He was shot down and survived in a raft on the ocean for nearly 50 days, enduring hardship almost unspeakable, and at times difficult to even accept vicariously. When he is finally rescued, it is by the enemy, and, incredibly, his suffering escalates. He was put in a series of prison camps, where he was treated in a manner that could only be called inhuman. Beaten, tortured, starved, constantly humiliated and degraded, living in fear for his life every moment, seeing his fellow prisoners beaten, sometimes to death, all of this was well told in unsparing detail, and consequently difficult to read. Like the horse story, however improbably, it had redemption, a happy ending. The man somehow survived, the war ended, and he returned to his country, married, and tried to adapt to peacetime civilian life. For a time, he could not do it. He was troubled by his memories and his dreams, which reenacted the agony and horror of his captivity. He was living in unremitting darkness, a hell that did not lift until his wife took him to a tent revival meeting led by Billy Graham, who reached him through his words and saved him by faith, a happy ending stamped at the end when the man, a former athlete, carried the Olympic torch over a path near one of his former POW camps. The scene demands a full flourish of Hollywood soundtrack. Everyone can go home reassured. That's fine and true, or at least nonfiction, and uplifting, and in keeping with the title of the book, which is Unbroken. But as a reader, I was not able to make that transition. I was still back with the man who was unquestionably broken, along with many other prisoners and guards who were also badly, badly broken. The book successfully presented a stark portrait of what human beings are capable of doing, the extremes they can survive, and the vicious, brutal, totally unrestrained behavior they can inflict time after time after time, simply because they can. The microcosm of the prison camp is a far extreme, a unique setting in which all the veneers of civilized life, as well as the guidelines of the Geneva Convention and what we like to think of as fundamental human decency, are stripped away, and what remains is simply bestial. The author uses an expression which stays with me long after the flourish of the happy ending, and that is the, quote, hungry willingness, unquote, of men to brutalize, dehumanize, and kill one another, if circumstances permit. We know this occurs. The Nazi death camps, the March at Bataan, the Trail of Tears, Abu Ghraib, Gitmo, all people have done it with a hungry willingness and suffered it. At one of the sites of one of the prison camps after the end of the war, the former captives, seeking some kind of solace, closure, or salvation, call it what you will, sought to have a memorial for themselves and their comrades who did not survive, a tangible reminder of what had happened there. You can understand the problem. The natives living in that area were, on the whole, willing to make that gesture, seeking forgiveness, but some of them were pushed to resistance and protest, believing that they were being unfairly victimized. In the end, in a compromise, there were 2 plaques, one for the POWs who died there and one for the guards who were hanged after being tried and convicted of war crimes. How conflicted people must feel when they stand at such a memorial. The book traces the story of one guard who was especially vile. A chapter of the book is entitled Monster. After the war, he was in hiding, believed to be dead, and he finally emerges. By then the reprisals are over. The former adversaries now coexist side by side, however uncomfortably, like that memorial, in a peacetime culture. So all sentences and crimes are commuted. The armistice prevails. There are no more trials, and all prisoners are released, even the ones awaiting execution. Time will heal all wounds. It did in the case of the hero of the book. The guard refused to blame himself for his behavior. He said that whatever he had done, or might have done, it was because of the war that created such a hungry willingness in men to maim and kill one another. When people say war is hell, when people say all is fair in war, they're not exaggerating. There may be an art of war, but there are no rules of engagement, and anyone who says there are is either lying or delusional. War is its own engine and makes its own rules. The author of the book presented all of this, and it was a difficult book to read, even harder to forget. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If we remembered these things, these cruel, horrible things, which are nothing less than scenes out of horror movies where creatures capture, torture, and kill, you'd think it might be possible to avoid them in the future at all costs. But history says otherwise. History says, go ahead and enjoy your happy endings. The hungry willingness is resting. It will come again.